I do think that it is in community and in an ongoing fashion, in conversations. So if this is the first time you've watched this film, there's many other kinds of films like this, and there's many books to be read, and the work just has to keep going and be ongoing. And it has to happen at the dinner table, it has to happen in our faith communities, and it has to happen in our workplaces. So if you work at a workplace and you've never done an implicit bias training, then you should be calling up your human resources person and saying, we need this kind of training, right? If, you know, you're watching a trailer and the Black Panther, which is like the first African-American superhero movie that's going to be out there, is coming out, you need to point out to people, oh, look, how long this took to happen, right? You need to point that out everywhere all the time so that people recognize that racism is happening in our lives everywhere, every place. That when you walk through the department stores, and all the makeup girls are white girls, right? Like, what's up? You know, why? What's the Band-Aids? You know, there's all different kinds of ways that you can point out racism all the time, always, and to be paying attention to it and having those conversations in ways that allows people some space to take it in and some space to make mistakes. Because none of us are going to be perfect in this process, and we're going to hurt each other a little bit along the way, but that's the only way we're going to move forward.
It can also be as subtle as a photograph that you lay in your child's room and walk away. I grew up in Montreal, Montreal, and in Montreal, I'm a child of divorces, so during my school year, I would go, I'd be in Canada, and then during the summer, I'd come back to Brooklyn. And in Montreal, the beef was over language. So my friends would be fighting over whether or not you speak French or English. But then I would spend the summer in Brooklyn, and the beef was skin color. So, as crazy as that sounds, it actually enriched me as a child, because by the time I became a teenager, I knew that black, the definition of black wasn't small, wasn't limited. I also knew that my stepmother, who would be called a white woman, was a good woman. And that I couldn't hate her because of her skin color. She helped put me through school. So these are the things that challenged my own thinking, but my parents never said, you should do this, and you should do that, and you should pay attention to this. They just simply lived. And by example, I just noticed. The difficulty began actually when I started living in the States and having all of a sudden to prove that I was black enough to black people. That's really what started happening. So all of a sudden listening to Fleetwood Mac wasn't black enough. So I had to get my Earth, Wind and Fire groove real quick. Because, you know, when you're a kid, you want to belong. So I couldn't tell my friends that my stepmother was white. That wasn't cool enough. Right? And I couldn't say I actually like Led Zeppelin. But I also had a Jewish best friend who wasn't allowed to hang out with me. And that sort of made me realize, oh, I'm black. Oh, this is it. This is what black is. So it could be all what we just described, but it can also be an example by you just being who you are, and the children are paying attention. They are paying attention. They're just waiting for us to get it together.
Thank you for offering us such a breadth of perspective on that. Susie, was there a question on your side of the room?
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, I just want to make this issue also a little global, not just at the level of the United States, because I do say that we are pretty much like programmed to accept one kind of violence and reject other kind of violence. For example, when we have terrorist attacks in Europe, it takes just minutes for us to find out about those terrorist attacks in Europe. But for example, right now we have at least 3 genocides taking place in the planet. We have a genocide taking place in South Sudan. We have another genocide taking place in Yemen. We have another genocide taking place in Congo, but people don't know about these people dying in mass numbers in those countries. And that's one chronic racism, because we're being programmed by these media and also social media to reject or accept certain kind of violence. And another thing about a criticism that I have against some mentality in this country is something that you call American exceptionalism, which is that we are so superior to the rest of the planet that we have nothing to learn but actually to teach the rest of the planet. Then that's something even deeper that we really should think about, and we should think about it, because I mean, this country has great things, but many countries around the planet also have a lot of things to offer, and we should have the humbleness to actually open ourselves and just learn from those other countries, not just the great things about this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not even sure how much comment needs to be made, because that in itself was a really helpful comment in reminding us of the context. It's not just that our nation was founded on violence, it's that when our nation was founded, us of the context, it's not just that our nation was founded on violence, it's that when our nation was founded on violence, that was a reflection of the worldview of races and cultures.
Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Kahlil. I'm a resident of Austin all my life. I grew up out of the 50s when the lights used to dim in my house, and my mother said, "You're getting somebody else to sing. I grew up with that. It's just one of the things at an early age. I guess my question would be, taking from what I've seen in the documentary, and I've seen it maybe about 3 times, the information regarding ALEC, regarding the CCA, and in relation to the activist level of awareness of those organizations and how they directly or indirectly affect us as residents and this community in general, being that we're a prison community. How we would be made more aware, how that information could be made more visible, and people, especially people here that have been exposed to this for the first time, how can we process and take that information, put it into some sort of action, maybe through our local government being aware.
I see you looking at me again.
Local government being aware and possibly taking some sort of action. I don't know, but I guess that's my question. I know it's kind of bouncing around, but my question is generally in that direction. How would we take that information regarding those 2 organizations that seem to really directly affect our prison system and funneling through legislation, us in general? How would we, on an activist level, deal with that?
So I'll take that, if that's okay, for starters. So I'm not sure this is a direct answer, but I think there's people who are monitoring and tracking things that ALEC is doing, and you can engage with groups that are focused on federal policy that ALEC might be supporting, and I can try to connect you with some of those groups. But I think the other thing we can do on local policy is move some local policy in our own communities that addresses some criminal justice issues. And I think as we approach candidate forums and elections coming up, we can be asking candidates where they stand on these issues. What are you going to do to reduce mass incarceration? What are you going to do to address unnecessary arrests? And if they have no sense of, I'm going to do something about bail, I'm going to do something about speedy trial, I'm going to do something about police-community relations, that's not the person who I'd pull the trigger for, right? I wouldn't pull the lever. I wouldn't pull the lever for that individual. So I think the time is coming to make those questions part of the questions that are asked in community forums. And I expect that the NYCLU is going to have a voter guide and some questions prepared. So if you sign up outside, I left a list. I'd be happy to share that with people. Additionally, there's some local legislation that you can work in your communities to pass. I'm working in Poughkeepsie and in White Plains on a bill called the Right to Know Act, which addresses searches, which is a very common way that people are, items are identified and people are arrested and then incarcerated, and that has an identification component, so that when police officer first approaches a person, they actually have to introduce themselves.
May I have your attention, please? The library is closing in 10 minutes. If you have any items you wish to check out, please bring them to the circulation desk now. The library will be open tomorrow from 7 to 6:30. Thank you, and have a good evening.
So on the table on the way out, there is a piece of paper called the Right to Know Act, and that's that bill, and then there's some legislation called STAT, which is around the statistics, transparency, and accountability. What, is it Victoria?
Me? Yes.
Is holding is a group called the Westchester Coalition for Police Reform, and that group and I are working on passing local legislation that increases police transparency and accountability, called the Right to Know Act. So we're happy to have more folks. I'm happy to have more folks anywhere all the time working on these issues.
If I could just address two things that you said real quick. I grew up in Ossining too, from 1991 to 1998 at 354 Hunter Street. I just want to say that the death house is still, it's in the down the hill, we call it. It's still the place. The only room I've ever been in with no air conditioning, the room is always 10 degrees colder than outside. Bill Weber, who used to be the president of the New York Theological Seminary, who was responsible for bringing the master's program of Master Professional Studies from New York Theological Seminary to Sing Sing, said to me, maybe 6 months after I got out, and I was asked to go and preach in a church up in, I don't know, some very white community in some very white church, and I didn't know what to say or what to do. And I called Bill, who was about maybe 87 years old at the time, and I said, Bill, I'm going up there to preach at this church, and I'm a social activist preacher, and I'm a big black guy going up there to preach to these Baptists, going Pentecostal to preach to these Presbyterians, what do I do? And Bill said to me, he said, Darren, you're a big black man with a big black voice, and you're going up there to deal with folks who are dealing with 400 years of guilt, so go up there and scare the hell out of them. And what the underlying message in that was one of activism. And the underlying message in that is don't be unashamedly and unabashedly who you are, and speak unashamedly and unabashedly about what you believe in, and do justice rather than think about justice, and be a part of justice rather than just considering justice. And I've walked with that every day of my life since he said those words to me, and I don't think there's any truer words that we can live by in terms of the work that we want to do for change.
Wow. I hate to say this, but we're going to have to wrap it up soon. I don't know, Susie, if we can get one more question in there. As I walk up to hand the microphone, we have any witness. You get the last question. Kendall, I'll just say, I'll put on my mayor's hat for a second. I'm just learning about this that Shannon brought, so I'll look into that, but there are a couple of things come to mind on a local level. One of them is the chief has talked about scheduling implicit bias training for our department, but it certainly hasn't happened, at least not anytime recently. So having that happen would be a very tangible thing that we do locally. I will give Ossining a little bit of credit. We certainly have a long way to go to really undo the years of everything that we just watched when it comes to law enforcement. But we're the first community in Westchester to have the cameras, and there's a lot of different positions and things we can learn from cameras and who's using them and how they're used. But the intention was to try and make sure that we had some honest accounting of things that happen. And we're the only community in Westchester that has a police civilian complaint review board that is active. So it's something that we're conscious of. We're far from perfect, and we need to do more. And thank you for pushing us.
A lot of you guys talked about dismantling the system, like brick by brick and other things like that. I was wondering, how much do you support abolishing police as like a whole, as the whole entire system, as a way of a solution to mass incarceration or any other racial injustices?
I'll just say this real quick. I think the root of a thing determines the fruit of a thing, and precincts in and of themselves were developed in the 17 and 1800s to catch runaway slaves. So if precincts in the 1700s and 1800s were to catch runaway slaves, then what do precincts do now? And I'm not saying that cops are going to be runaway slaves, and I'm not saying that all cops are bad, but I'm just saying the mindset and the root of a thing determines the fruit of a thing, right? So that's one thing. So yeah, I do think that the police, the way that we police fundamentally has to change. I don't think that we can do away with police, because not having police departments would cause anarchy. And I don't think anybody wants to live through the purge. But I do think that some of us understand that we have to fundamentally change the way that we do policing, and we have to fundamentally change the way that we train our police officers, and we fundamentally have to change the way that we screen our police officers, because there are far too many people who have mental health issues, and I think that racism for some folks is actually a mental health issue, because some of the sentiments that they espouse are actually crazy. So I think that when we start doing those things, then we can start dismantling the system. I think it's almost impossible without an actual physical revolution that would destroy many lives and lose a lot of loss of life. I don't think it's any fundamental way to actually dismantle the entire system and rebuild it unless we do it from within.
So, you've heard the librarian giving us our lovely friendly announcements, and they really are going to turn the lights off in a few minutes. So I would like to ask all of our panelists to please leave us with a final thought, something that you want to be sure that we have in our minds as we walk out the door. And if you have not gotten the take action nows, please be sure that you do. And Susie's pantomiming something, yes?
We're gonna usher you really quickly for a
photo
op. If you want, as we're cleaning up, please mingle with the out.
Right, did everybody get that? So the committee of volunteers takes a photo with their panelists. That's how we promote it going forward. But then they'll be able to answer some questions on the way out. Yes, please.
I just want to further honor your question. There are several ways to go about that, and I think the Reverend is right. We don't want anarchy. And by the way, mental illness is not just someone walking around going, ooh. Mental illness is also very subtle, what I call functional depression, you know. So, but what happened in Ferguson last summer? After all the rah-rah, after all that, the community had an opportunity to vote that racist mayor out, and nobody came to the voting booths, and that mayor was re-elected. A black or a person of African descent ran against that mayor and lost. So we also have to try to get not only to the fruit, but to the actual root.
Yes.
When poor black and brown people decide to get involved in the political arena,
Yes.
that's when the police department will change, because now I have a say on who the sheriff's going to be, what kind of police officers are going to be in my neighborhoods. So it really starts with us. We also have to call it what it is, police terrorism. And if you don't have brown skin, you have no idea what police terrorism is and feels like. You really have to understand how privileged you are, how privileged your kids are when you put their coats on and they go to school. You don't have to have the conversation that the rest of us have to have with that child. So when we decide to get involved at the basic level, you know, we tend to get involved at the presidential elections, and we learned from Obama that if you vote just for the president, but the local and state and city still operates as business as usual, the president's hands are tied. So we have to learn from Republicans, where they vote at the primaries. I vote at the primaries. I'm interested to know what type of police officers are in my neighborhood, policing my community. So that's another way of changing that police department.
Thank you very much.
I'm just going to briefly in closing say, don't leave here and do nothing, right? Do something. read The End of the New Jim Crow, sign up to volunteer somewhere, review some bills, set up a meeting with your legislator, your mayor, your chief, but keep working at this a little bit all the time, and that's what it's going to take.
All I want to say is, God bless you, thank you for having me, and by virtue of the fact that you are here, you're listening, you're attentive, and you're ready, and your heart is open, because I can feel that in the room, and that means that the change is on the way, and you all are a part of that. So thank you.
Oh, yes, sir.
Is it possible to become a friend of the series by making a donation after the film?
It is. There's a beautifully decorated box with butterflies on it on the table outside. Please join the Friends of the Series. We're thrilled to have you here. We look forward to your support for future screenings.